Marty?
Yeah, much to my surprise, there are some questions here.
Yeah. Let us close the door. We're having the discussion. Thank you. Very good.
And first questioner is Steve Zipperstein.
For those of you who...
Could you just wait
Sure.
a second until I get my hearing aids on?
Of course, of course. Maybe I should speak beforehand.
Wouldn't change his answer.
Okay.
Or, as the evil rabbis once said, derech agav, just by the by, if those of you who would like to know what Norman Cantor thought of my historical vision before we met in the flesh 2 days ago, look at his comments about 2 of my books in his survey of Jewish history. Proximity, and this also perhaps unsettles a liberal myth, proximity does not necessarily lead to, apparently, to affection. But, I want to make a very minor. I wouldn't know where to begin to respond to this far-ranging talk, but I want to make a very minor bibliographical comment in praise of a Pole, a Polish Jew who was, it seems to me, somewhat disparaged in this talk. Selo Baron, in particular, in his first edition of his social and religious history of the Jews, published in 1937, spoke with great erudition, and there, immeasurably, in a more concise way than in his somewhat more rambling second edition, a work of monumental erudition at the same time, about many of the themes, many of the themes that Professor Cantor suggested have been hidden from view. It seems to me all the more appropriate to speak about this man's achievements, at least a sentence or two, because what he also produced was arguably a great statement of secular Jewish life, of how Jews actually lived, of how they worked, where they propagated. An extraordinary work. And it seems to me that if this session, I'm not going to come out in defense of the Pope, although I have every hope that every human being lives a long and fruitful life. But it seemed to me that if the session were to end with what Professor Cantor said about Baron, something unfair, perhaps even bad, would have taken place. And so I just wanted to make this statement in the name of truly great erudition.
Can I respond?
It probably, I don't imagine Professor Cantor would disagree with anything that I've said, and I don't know that it really requires a response.
Well, I'd still like to comment. I said he was a wonderful man, right? I thought very highly of him.
There are many wonderful men, and there are it's rare to find someone of such great erudition.
I agree with you. The erudition is wonderful. What is fascinating in his book are his footnotes. Some of them are disquisitions and all sorts of very recondite things. And his knowledge of language was phenomenal. I think at one point I counted something like 11 different languages. But I will say again, as a work of history, the 17-volume social and religious history of the Jews is very boring and for whole volumes virtually unreadable. I'm sorry, that's my judgment.
Ada?
I must say that listening to the paper about a topic which, although I don't do research in medieval Jewish history, I've taught generations of undergraduate students various courses that relate to it. I'm familiar with the basic literature. I'm intrigued to discover so many discrepancies between what I have read, taught, and what you were saying. And I defer to you as a medievalist, which I am not, to explain to me on the basis of what, for example, you, and I'm now, I don't know if you were aware, but I was frantically writing down things as you were speaking, and I'm not going to be able to capture all of them. I'll just mention 2 or 3 that I can recall at the moment. You said, for example, that the greatest age of Ashkenazi Jewry was between 500 and 1,000. I mean, I've been telling for my sins to my students that Ashkenazi culture begins at around 1,000. What is your evidence for Ashkenazi culture between 500 and 1,000? As far as I know, we don't know what the Jews were doing, where exactly they were. We have some monumental evidence about the presence of Jews, or probably Jews, people with names that look Jewish in various parts of Mediterranean Europe, but we don't have a single word that they wrote. We don't know what they thought. We don't know what books of the Jewish tradition, whether they had the Talmud, the Mishnah, or not. So you also, if I may just give you my short list, I'll be very eager to hear what you say. You similarly mark the decline of Ashkenazi Jewry at what seems to me a remarkably early age. You put it at the beginning of the 12th century. Before, that is, some of the most immense contributions of Ashkenazi Jewry to the Jewish tradition, before the Tosafists, before Ashkenazi Pietism, before the largest and most influential bodies of Jewish literature that Ashkenaz has produced were ever even conceived. All right, I mean, I have quite a few.
Well, it all depends on your use of the word culture. If you define culture as associated with a textual discourse, and particularly rabbinical discourse, it is true that during the period of the 12th and 13th centuries, there was the efflorescence of this kind of rabbinical textual culture. I mean, I said that. I don't, well, maybe I misspoke, but I thought I made that clear. But what I meant that the golden age of Ashkenazic life was in the first half of the 11th century. As I said, Gershon Cohn, among others, and you've confirmed that from your research, do not think that the rabbinical culture really fastened on and took hold in the cities and valleys of the Western Europe till after 1000. All right, I said that. But I am thinking of culture in a very broad sense of people's action and their behavior. I'm not identifying it strictly with the textual culture. And here is where I and you, and along with some other people on this panel, disagree. I do not identify Jewish culture with the rabbinical tradition. To me, that is only one among many strands in Jewish culture, and a culture that has done some very good things, and in my opinion, has done some bad things. But if you want to make as your identification of a Jewish culture, the rabbinic culture, and the rabbinic text, and Rashi and the commentators, and Nachmanides, and all those people, then sure, you're right. But that's not what I was referring to, and I sure don't think anyone could have misconceived what I was saying. We do not have much in the way of internal knowledge of what went on in the Jewish world of half a millennium. But we do know from general sources, from Gentile sources, Jews were immensely active in this period. There is voluminous documentation in a period where there isn't much documentation in general, what Jews were doing. We know a tremendous amount about their role in commercial life. We know how much monarchs depended upon them for the introduction. Wait a second, I got the floor. All right, you had the floor, and I'll have the floor. I was very quiet yesterday, but I'm not going to stay quiet forever. Jews were very important in fashioning the bureaucratic regimes of the early Middle Ages. Even many bishops depended upon them for the introduction of what you might call literacy and rationalism into the chaotic life of that time. And then when you look at Goitein's massive work, now is it true the veil that Kanitsa documents start from about 950, 975, but when you read them, already you have this vast society engaged in this enormous international commerce in terms of the area which they had to extend themselves, almost inconceivable. Right, all the way from Cordova to west coast of Africa. That's already very active. They have worked out their whole financial instruments. They have worked out a system of correspondence. You can see halakhic life beginning to penetrate into these people, even though they are not fully involved in it. In fact, how can you be an international merchant on those little rickety boats and those ox carts and still observe everything? Maybe you can today, but it was very difficult in the Middle Ages. But you can see even there the beginnings of what you talk about, and so greatly applaud the introduction of this textual culture. But you can see there around 975 this wonderful commercial culture of the Jews, this great capitalist culture, which there's nothing like it in Western Europe until the 16th century Dutch and the 17th century English, hard at work. Isn't that a great cultural achievement? What the hell is Rashi and those people got to do compared to the great achievement of the Jewish commercial capitalists who transformed the whole of the Mediterranean world?
Lois.
We're going to go on for a few minutes.
Yeah, wait, a little less salad. Lois.
I'm going to try to be very brief. Like Ada, I have a long list, and I don't want to be too boring. Not to imply that you were boring, forgive me.
Or as boring as Rashi.
No, I think Ari showed that Rashi is not necessarily boring.
I agree.
I want to leave the realm of culture. I think at this moment I really prefer to talk about politics. I think you were very careful, and I appreciated your effort to distinguish between the Inquisition and Hitler's genocide of European Jewry. And I wish you had been as careful in distinguishing, in other respects, between phenomena of either the ancient world or the medieval world and the modern and contemporary world. And I really think it does a great disservice to the study of Jewish history and to the appreciation of it, whether by scholars or by lay people, to use words like a Jew badge or a Jew star for the Roman period. I'm very curious to know what evidence you have to make that kind of assertion. I think it does a great disservice to talk about ghettos, ghettos, which you did say that's a term that only came into currency. It was also a reality that only came into currency in Italy in the 16th century. And the reason we can't speak about ghettos before that period is, yes, you had Jewish neighborhoods, but these were not enclosed by walls, they were not locked at night from the outside, and Jews were not legally required to live within their precincts. So a neighborhood is not a ghetto. And I really don't know where to go from here, except to say, any outbreak of mass violence against the Jews, which, as you correctly said, the Crusaders perpetrated against the Jews, I don't think it helps us to call it a pogrom. And
what do you call it, a military expedition?
What I really object to is I think that it's very loaded to take these terms from more recent history and talk as if that's exactly the way it was and generate an emotional response which is comforting and unsettling at the same time, but all to the same purpose. And I really can't say any more.
I'm sorry I've offended your. I'm sorry I've offended your high scholarly sensibility. All right. I believe you can only understand the past in terms of the present. And I believe if Jews are living in. Wait a minute. You had your turn. Now give me my turn. If Jews are living in segregated neighborhoods, if the Theodosian and Justinian Code say that Jews cannot build synagogues without episcopal approval, if the bishops are going to confine Jewish synagogues to the slums of a town, if the Jews have to wear funny hats and labels. No, it is not the ghetto of the 16th century. But for heaven's sakes, it represents a terrible deterioration of Jewish life from what it was, let's say, in the great cities of Asia Minor and Alexandria in the first 2 centuries AD, when the Jews participated centrally in both the commercial and the intellectual life. I don't understand. Are you defending the late Roman emperors because they were nasty to the Jews? Do you think I insulted those wonderful guys like Theodosius II? For heaven's sakes, your scrupulousness carries over to the level of idiocy.
Thank you very much. I refrained. Thank you very much. If that's what you want to call me, I proudly accept the badge.
He said your scrupulousness carries over to the level of idiot.
What badges? What hats?
We're going to stop. All right. I think we understand that when we disagree, we need to keep our language appropriate, Norman. All right. I'd like to say that it's now time for lunch. I do want to... All right, yeah. And by the way, I want to thank you for a certainly sensational and provocative presentation. So, all right, great.